Welcome to the NYU Steinhardt Jazz Interview Series, and tonight I'd like you to welcome our guest, the amazing Chandrika Tandon. So we're expanding our horizons tonight because we're inviting somebody that dips her toe in many worlds. And tonight we're going to talk about your music world and some other worlds, because you're a leader in business, you're a Grammy-nominated Indian singer, and you're an internationally known humanitarian. So thank you for sharing your life with us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Let's talk about you as a musician first, because we were having a discussion earlier talking about your Hindustani traditions and your Carnatic traditions, and also your Western traditions. And the folks in the room here heard a sampling of what you do. It's phenomenal. And can you talk about your musical upbringing? How did you get involved in music first?
So my story is a really unusual story in terms of music. You know, when I was very little, I sang before I could speak. So I was, when I was almost, I have my earliest memories of doing all my chores singing. I don't even remember what chores I was doing. So I'd listen to whatever was there and just reproduce it. But then, and I learned a little bit of music and then stopped singing for probably 30 years.
Well, let me ask you, where did you grow up?
It was in Chennai, in Madras. It was, it's a bigger town now, but at the time that I was growing up in, it was a very small, village-like place. And we lived in a very simple home, and, we had a lot of jobs, so that's where I grew up.
So earlier we were talking about what would have been your connection to music compared to your, along with your culture, as compared to how we view music and culture in the West?
Well, Indian music is there's a very strong tradition of Indian music, particularly if you're growing up in a small town in India. You've got the classical Indian music, which is the Carnatic music, which I know you've had a session on before. But we also grew up with Bollywood. You all have heard of Bollywood, but film music was a very big influence. But one of the things I'll tell you is that we only had 2 radio stations. And those 2 radio stations started at 5 a.m. in the morning and finished at 11 o'clock. And so we didn't think, oh, let's listen to jazz or let's listen to Indian music. We just listened to whatever was playing in those 2 radio stations. One station played in one room, the other station played in the other room. So you could basically walk from one room to the other and get whatever music or conversation was going on. So music just surrounded us. And also in the Indian tradition, a lot of the rituals are with music. You put a child to sleep with music. You wake up, a lot of the religious life, which is what a lot of simple Indian life is about music. Because, you imagine divinity as a baby, you imagine divinity as a man, as a woman, as a mother, as a child. So you have all these songs that are just passed down from generation to generation. It's entirely an oral tradition in terms of how we learned music.
Now, earlier today we were talking about, I had this Carnatic trio here, the G3 trio with Selva Ganesh and Viku, his father, and the grandson. And maybe you can clarify this for us, because in Indian music they have the Indian vocal rhythms, spoken rhythms. And in that conversation, they were talking about how much the rhythms and the math and the problem solving with the math allowed them to potentially be great mathematicians and computer scientists. And so we see that across that region of the world now. It's like there's so many great problem solvers in that area. So how do you describe that as well?
In Indian music, both with the rhythm as well as with the notes, it's all a matter of, once you've learnt the structure, it's a matter of calculations. So I'm going to give you an example. So you're going to sing for 1 hour with 5 notes. and you've got a 8-beat rhythm. You can imagine how boring it's going to get very soon if all you're going to do, let's imagine you have 8 beats, one is a downbeat, and you've got 7 other beats to follow, and you've got just 5 notes. You're not allowed to add a single other note to your singing. And let's take a pentatonic scale. So the problem is that you then have to get creative. You have to get creative both with the rhythms, and you have to get creative with the way you express the notes, the way you place the words within the rhythms, which is the vocal side of it. So when you think about rhythms, then you're not counting it as 8. You're counting it almost every note from 1 to 2. We think of them as having a series of intervals. So you think of each note as having maybe 4 intervals, and then the more sophisticated musicians can think of them as having 8 intervals. So if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, to, you take it off the offbeat. Every time you can take it off different offbeats, and then you can land on different offbeats, and it confuses the hell out of someone else because they're saying, well, you're not on, you're not on the beat. But it doesn't matter. I know exactly where I am. It's a very conscious decision to not be on the downbeat, and I can come back and catch it. In North Indian music, you then are working with 16 beats, and very often you don't know where the 16th beat is and where the first beat is, because the drummer is meandering on his or her own way into the 16 beats, but all you're trying to do is to catch the first beat. So between that, he's going on his 16 beats, you're going on your journey, and the two of you have to come back together and match on the first beat. And sometimes you might match on the 32nd beat or the 33rd beat. So there's a whole lot of calculations you're mentally doing while you're singing.
But you grew up with this.
Well, I wouldn't say I grew up with it, but a lot of the great masters of music grew up with that. When, somebody like the people that you interviewed, they had a whole lifetime where from the time they were babies, they started to just practice this 100 different ways. And the other thing I'll tell you is that in South Indian music and North Indian music as well, we learned dancing. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're a good dancer or a bad dancer, but dance allows you to deal with rhythm in a very structured way. So, and you speak the words. So, you say, tadingena tom, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's the way you speak the word. So the combination of speech and rhythm is very common to us. So it's very easy for us to speak the rhythms. And in fact, when you learn the beats, 1, 2, 3, 4, the 16 beats, for example, dha din din na, dha din din na, ta din din na, taka din din na. So you learn it that way. So you just speak and learn the beats. And so automatically you've got divisions when you're speaking.
So when did you first, well, I guess listening to the radio, you heard Western music as well.
Yes.
So it's all the same to you, I guess.
Yes, and so that's what would happen. So I could tell you all the songs of Cliff Richard, Dean Martin. So we would have all these amazing musicians playing. We didn't know who they were. The Seekers, Europe pop, and that's what would play. And so we had a complete knowledge of some lyrics that you all probably have never heard of. Some singers and lyrics, because that was our very wide musical. I mean, Charlie Bird. I mean, in college I was listening to a lot of Stan Getz, Charlie Bird. A lot of the jazz musicians were big on my list.
You're saying Dean Martin was popular?
Dean Martin,
wow.
Yes, of course. Yeah, but not the Broadway stuff. But it was much more Euro, Old English, because that was a colonialized country.
So now, okay, let's stop on this for a second and talk about, because you didn't pursue music at that time.
Yes.
Let's talk about your pursuits.
So I went into the business world. I studied hard, and then I became a business person, and I traveled all over the world. I was a partner at a world-class management consulting firm, and I formed my own company, and I was all over the world in different parts of literally I lived in Brazil, I lived in Australia, name a country I've visited or lived there. So I couldn't sing, I couldn't find masters to teach me, but in Brazil, for example, I learned the language, Portuguese, through music. So I would go at 10 o'clock or 9 o'clock when we'd finish my meetings with all the clients and dinners. I would hit the piano bars. Sometimes I would be the only person in a Sao Paulo piano bar by myself, which was not very safe, but I would go there and I could sing the words, and it was so weird. I didn't know some of the basics of Portuguese, but I could tell you poetic phrases in Portuguese, the vida de vagabundo, this sort of stuff, because that came in a particular song. It was the same with French, because I learned, I have such a big repertoire of French songs, like Enrique Macias, Serge Gainsbourg. I just learned the language. I learned some French, but then my French became a lot better with the music. So I would just sing. I mean, you give me a Françoise Hardy song and I can sing it to perfection with a good accent. I used to be better at it. I don't sing it as much anymore. But that's how I learned music and language, and everything came together. And then that was a lifetime until 10, 12 years ago, this was my life.
So you had time to do all that, learn all these languages. I guess you had to learn them for your business as well.
And I love languages.
Yes.
I think if you're a musician, you all like language. I mean, it's so beautiful. And French is so romantic. When you say ne me quitte pas, it sounds more romantic than saying if you go away. It's more subtle.
What other languages do you speak?
A few.
Okay. I mean, you had me at French, let's say.
No, I wouldn't. I'm not good at any of these, but I speak, a few Indian languages, French, Portuguese. Can get by. But I can sing in a lot of languages.
Well, let's go back to your business. I just want to touch on that for a minute, because you've done significant things here. You've been such a great addition to NYU, being on the board of trustees and now the Tandon School for Engineering. And to do all that and to speak like a musician is, I will say that you're a very exceptional person.
Thank you for that.
In front of the camera, so now everybody knows.
Though I think the music, reconnecting with the music for me, which was about 15 years ago, 12 years ago, this became a very big crisis. And I want to talk about this because this was a turning point in my life. Until about 12 or 13 years ago, I was so intensively in the business world. I was type A ad nauseum. I was accomplishing stuff. I was in the pursuit of good things for my client, good things for life. I drove myself very hard. I run a company, I still do, but I drove everyone around me very hard, because I did big restructuring projects all over the world. And for me, the moment came almost as a wonderful, now I feel utter gratitude that I had this moment. But I literally had an epiphany, almost like a breakdown, in the middle of no apparent crisis in my life. My life is going well. I mean, I have a child who's doing quite well. My husband I didn't have a health issue. My business was going great. I had to take on a major assignment in Germany for a big financial institution. I couldn't take it on. I have no idea why. I simply had to understand what made me happy. What am I going to do? Continue the next several years just looking for the next deal, look for the next situation? Who am I? What if I died tomorrow and all I did is just had another deal? And so it was all these questions that one reads about, what's the purpose of your life and all of these, and they're all books. You could find 100 titles like that. But it became very real for me. So I had this really awkward situation when the CEO of the bank, the whole management team's trying to reach me. This is the days of cell phones. So it was landlines. I wasn't picking up any phone calls. For 2 days, I was like a spoiled child. I locked myself up and I was just thinking, and I cried, and I was trying to see what it is. And one of my answers was, the happiest moments of my life had to do with music. Music is who I was. All the rest is what I did. And then I said, okay, I've got to learn music. But who the hell's going to take on an old person to learn music? Because the masters that I wanted to learn from, they took on people when they were 3 years old, and then they trained them for the next 50 years, and nobody wanted me. So I became a music beggar, and I didn't want to learn from anybody mediocre. I wanted to learn from the great masters. So I begged. In fact, with one teacher, I would go to his house every time, and I would clean his dishes. I mean, and I'm telling you, this is a true story, because the Indian tradition is very different. You can't pay the masters to take you, because money is not a currency. So I would clean dishes, and then he'd say, well, I'll teach you. Yeah, I'll teach you. Okay, not today, tomorrow. And I've never, quote unquote, wasted time in this way. I mean, I bill my time, I run a major company. So this is what I did for many days. And then finally I got people to teach me, and then I started to I would go off to India and learn with these great masters. And I would work for 12 hours a day, damaging my voice in the process sometimes because I didn't understand techniques of how do you really, you can't, it's like going on to run a marathon after having barely been having been a waddler, and that was sort of my situation. And then but then fortunately for me, I did that. And I made it a huge priority, not because I wanted to get anywhere. I just wanted to feel the music. I wanted to hang on to the notes. I wanted to feel the love that this music generated in me.
Well, it seemed like you learned something from business. In business, they say always hire people who are better than you. So in that sense, find those greatest teachers that can inspire you the most.
Absolutely.
So who were those teachers?
I had teachers. I actually found a teacher in India who would teach me. And so I would fly down to India and literally for 2 weeks at a time, and then bring him here and have him stay near our house and then just work with him. But then what happened is after I started working with a couple of the teachers, I invited the great musicians. I would host a lot of concerts at that time. And then I would invite the musicians to just stay with me. And I would serve them, and then in return for that, they would teach me. So this was the bargain. So I now, most Indian musicians have one teacher, what they call a gharana, which is one school of music. I have, 10 great musicians I consider my teachers.
Do you know the Bansuri player Hari Prasad Chaurassian?
Yes, he's been to my house.
Okay, so I understand from him that he wanted to study with the great flute master or Bansuri master, and he had already started with someone else. So in order for the great master he wanted to study with, he'd only accept him if he played flute this way.
I'm not surprised.
Is that right? So
Yes.
that's an amazing story.
Each house of music because it's an oral tradition, they have very unique, specific traditions, and so that's how they teach you. So my approach was, I told every teacher, I'm not interested in being a concert performer. I want to learn songs that make me happy. So that was and of course no one understood it because everybody wanted me to perform, everybody wanted me to go on stage with them. So they'd say, if you'd only work with me for 6 more months, you can be performing in a concert. But I wasn't interested in performing. The music was not about others. The music for me was about finding my own light.
So how did you tap into that spiritual light?
Well, and that was what this whole process was, because when there's a beautiful saying, I learned a lot about myself and about life because of the music, and this new album is all about that theme. I don't know, how many of you here think of yourselves as perfectionists? How many of you practice so hard and then you're still not sure whether you've done a good enough job of perfection? Yeah, and perfection was a very important concept to me because I had spent a lifetime in business trying to be perfect, trying to do the best because clients were paying a lot of money for me, and I guess it's one's own insecurities. One of my teachers said to me when he asked me to sing in front of a lot of people, and I was barely trained at that moment. He said, look, I said, well, I'm not good enough to do this. And he says, if everybody is a nightingale, he says, this would be the most boring forest. And that stayed with me. And there's a very beautiful mystic saying in Urdu, actually, which says, when I was there, the divine was missing. The music, the divine was missing. I left, and then the divine took over. So that is the process. So when you leave and you stop fretting about who you are, how you sound, did my notes sound good, who am I, all of that, the music just comes out of you. You are really not creating it. You are really the vehicle for something beautiful to come out of you. That's what I believe. That's what I have learned.
So how long did that take you?
It's a process.
Yeah.
I'm still learning it. I have my good days and my bad days, but I think that's a process. But I would say I'm much more, when I was nominated for a Grammy, I must tell you, I was probably the oldest youngest entrant in the music industry, in the Grammys. I mean, anybody who was my age, who was there in the nominees reception, had been in the music industry for 100 years by then. And I had just, I'd been in the music industry for a year, 6 months, Anybody else who'd been there for a year were these absolute, like, 16-year-olds, So it was, and I was putting myself out there to go sing, and it's been a great learning.
So everything you do, I mean, you continue in business, you continue to be on boards of trustees, you continue to produce records. You're living all these lives that, I'm struggling to be the director here, and the students are struggling to be students here. And you're living 3 or 4 lives all at once. What's the secret?
But I think it all reinforces each other. My secret is not about the lives. My secret is about being my happiest, best self, whatever I'm doing. It's just being in my light. And that's what I think about. I don't think about it as music. I mean, I've spent the whole day in a trustees meeting, NYU trustees meeting. And I don't think of it. I think they all inform each other and they all affect each other. The way I look at people has changed, because if you don't have standards of perfection for yourself, how can you have it for others? How can you expect people to do, how can you get so judgmental? And if you're really focused on purity of purpose, as I define a lot of how I think about life, it is about doing the right thing. It doesn't matter what you really think, because a lot of times there's so much chatter in our own heads about, oh, should I say this? What will happen? I mean, I don't know if you all have the chatter. I sure had it a lot. You have the chatter? Am I alone out there? But there was so much chatter, which is, oh my goodness, I know I've got a good point, but I better not make it. He's looking at me kind of funny. She's not that interested in what I've got to say. All this just wastes a lot of energy. And I think now it's most of the time it's not what comes into my radar screen, really. I meditate a lot, and that all has changed my life. Music itself is a meditation.
Well, let me ask you, do you have to partition your life now? Because right here, you seem like a musician. You seem like one of us. If you go into a board meeting tomorrow, are you going to start talking when you're talking numbers, and do you have another language, another persona?
No, in fact, today they said, oh, she's going to talk to us about whatever committee I chair, and they said she'll sing out the lines, but I didn't. But I will tell you, initially, I sign every email and every letter I write, love, light, laughter. 10 years ago, when I would start doing that, people would laugh at me, saying, what is this? Are you nuts? Writing love, light, laughter in business communication. Now, people who I shan't name write back and say love and hugs. I mean, these are like, tyrannical people who you wouldn't imagine would be saying love and hugs, but a lot of people write back, because my perspective on it has changed, I would say. I'm sure people respond differently based on who you are. As I say, I don't think of it as different lives. I think of it as being in your light.
Have you met anybody else in the business world like you?
Yes. I mean, maybe they have. I think one of the most extraordinary things of what's happened over the last few years, as I've gotten more open and more enveloping of people because of the music, suddenly people I'd known for 20 years as unidimensional clients or unidimensional business executives, suddenly, in fact, yesterday, one person told me, oh, I'm sorry, you saw me leaving this meeting early. I just happened to go into a meditation room, which was next, and I just did my own meditation, and I came back and I feel amazing. I cannot imagine this person ever having this conversation with me, 7 or 8 years ago. So I think people have many more dimensions, but we as a group of people tend not to, that's not where we lead. That's not, you and I don't, as musicians we might, but we don't meet each other and lead off as business people with this thing of, oh, tell me about your meditation practice. That's not our opening gambit. But I think being who I am allows me to do that. Just saying, you look a little bit down today. What's wrong? Didn't do your meditation? Yeah.
I didn't.
No,
But you know what? I have to tell you, because you've opened up a lot of things for me when I've performed for your various councils, and all of a sudden, these people are looking at me that are true business people that are cut and dry. This is business, and all of a sudden they want to learn to play this Mongolian instrument, and it's because of you bringing these people into their world, or bringing my group or whoever.
yeah, but I think people have a natural, music enriches you. I mean, I think all of us, my album is called The Quest, and there was a very important reason I called it The Quest, Shivoham The Quest. We are all on a journey. The details are different, but all of us are on a journey for something beyond. All of us call it different terms. You know, you might call it, I don't know, more concerts, you might call it peace, some might call it love, some might call it money, some might call it something else, but we're all looking for this. We're on that journey. The details are different. Mm-hmm. So the moment you start to introduce different dimensions to people, I think people respond to it. That's what my experience is.
I think we have our next president of the United States here. I've spoken too soon, I think. Let's talk about your record, your new recording, because I asked you to record. Now this is funny, because I said, would you record something with us in our studio here at NYU? And she says, gee, I'm sorry, I'm recording at Abbey Road Studio with the London Symphony.
Right, that was quite an amazing experience. Yes, it was. So, you know, I've got to tell you, this album, we have 289 musicians on the album. We recorded in 4 countries, 9 studios, and so we did the London Strings, we did the London Voices, which was a beautiful group of singers in London, and then we recorded with the Soweto Gospel Choir, and then a whole group of soloists. And in fact, some of the sections were so complicated for these guys to play. And the London Strings Metropolitan Orchestra is one of the best sight readers that you can, if you get them together, but that's one of the reasons we went there. Of course, I wanted to also do it in Abbey Road. So we had to get the first violinists and the string people for an extra day after our number of days of recording were finished, just because they had to play the faster parts, and they all wanted a chance to go back home and practice it. So it was an extraordinary experience. Now,
you were saying when you were singing with the King's Choir, they were having trouble finding the beat because they said you were wrong.
Right, and it wasn't just wrong. They're saying it took us a while to figure out that you're not following the downbeat, but you sort of are, and you have your own rhythm that's sort of going with the songs. And I said, no, that's the way I think, because one of the guys, if you all heard of the King's Singers, it's this old English group, and they're beautiful singers. So they sang with me on one of the tracks, and I had a soloist from there, Jules, who was singing with me. And he had to follow my track, and he had a greatly difficult time doing that, because he wanted to sing "Lead Kindly Light," and I wasn't anywhere like that. So he had to find my rhythm, and that meant counting in whatever he had to count in to get there.
So was that? I mean, all these musicians in London were classical. If you had all the string players, was it a test for them to?
Yes, because we had scores written to the nth degree, right down to the UK terms of a feather and a quaver. Many of these terms, which are very unique to the way the London Orchestra does it, apparently, which I didn't know any.
And all
yes,
that. Yeah.
Yes, and which aren't the American terms. So we had a perfectly written American score, which we had to go back and add all the terms for the London musicians. So yeah, we had the score, but some of the passages were just too fast for them, because then they had to play in 10 beats, for example. And it's a song that we were playing when you all walked in was in 10 beats, and we did an ostinato in 4. So it was 5 and 5, and we did an ostinato in 4, and so they met up at 20. Does that make any sense?
That's new for some.
And so here, since we did that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you can break that 5 and 5 in different ways, 3, 3, and 4, 2, 2, all 2, 2, 2, 3, 3. And so I was breaking it up in different ways, and the ostinato was going differently. So we could record it all at the same time. We had to break up the recording sessions and do multi-track, which was not, so it couldn't be a full symphony play because everyone was getting distracted by what everyone else was doing. It's like, what? That's not the beat they're playing. No, that's, you stay with your 4. You're going to meet up at 20. But you have to count to 20. But that's not how we count.
Right. But that's the Indian way.
That's the Indian way.
Yeah.
That's a particular Indian way. And then I had this amazing person who worked with me, T. Skull, who kind of came up with this idea of bringing the ostinatos together with my 10 beats. And so it was a lot of fun.
So how long did it take you to write these? You wrote, how much did you write? You write the melodies, you
Everything.
write the lyrics, the harmonies. So how long did that take?
I would say,
By the way, this is a 3 CD box set, so it's a lot of music.
it's 90 minutes of music, 3 CDs, and it's the whole album's about the quest to find the light. So it's in 3 movements. The first movement is the movement of yearning. You're seeking something, you want something. The second movement is you searching. You want to intensify the seeking. And the third movement is connecting, when you actually connect with the light. So the words are in English and in Sanskrit. So I drew on old ancient verses like from the Bible, from, and I wrote a lot of English text, and I took a poem from Cardinal Newman, and then I married it with very ancient Indian verses. So that was the context for this album. And so the earliest, I think in a sense, this was a 20-year exploration almost, in terms of my thought process. But the intense work started 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, in a workshop with Kenny Warner. Most of the music came to me through the meditations that I had. And I was in a 10-day meditation, which is all going to sound bizarre and crazy to you all, but it's so true. I was in a 10-day meditation where they take away your phones, they take away your books, they take away your pens, they take away your paper. So you walk in, you give everything away, and then for 10 days you see others, but you're not allowed to speak. You eat 2 times a day, and you meditate from 4:30 in the morning until 9:30 at night, pretty much, with 2-hour breaks. So the greatest clarity of all my thoughts happened then. I heard the entire songs downloaded.
Pardon my ignorance here, but you understand Sanskrit?
I wouldn't say I understand Sanskrit. I would say I can recite many verses. It's like, does one ever understand Latin? Can one ever have a conversation in Latin, I wonder? A few might be able to, but I'm not one of them. But you can recite some amazing, Te Deums, even I can do that. So if you were singing in a choir, you know some beautiful verses. So I'm in that category. But what I do is I do a lot of research in Sanskrit, and I have done that. And I look and I work with the scholars to get the translations, because it's a 6,000-year-old language with a wealth of verses. So I've worked with scholars so let's say I want to sing about gratitude. I go through thousands of texts to find the verses that I want to. So I've got a lot of research that I've done on this.
Now, all recording artists find that once they organize a project, they conceive of a project, they organize it, they record it, they edit it, they finish it, it's mastered, and you listen to it back, and you say, gee, I should have done that. I should have done. Were you satisfied with this?
I wasn't, but the point was, before the mastering, I drove everyone mad. My mixing took me almost 8 months. We had about 400 tracks or 600 tracks on some of the songs. It's one of the most densely layered tracks you would ever see. And there's something, because we sometimes overlaid I told you there were 9 studios. And even there were 5 choirs.
How far-reaching were these studios? Where were they located?
South Africa. We did the Soweto Gospel Choir. We had 2 studios in India, and we had New York. We did MSR, Avatar. It's no longer Avatar, and Sear Sound. And then we had London. We did Abbey Road mostly. Most of it was Abbey Road, and then all the other ancillary studios. My vocals were done in New York. Mm-hmm. So we mixed and mixed and mixed, and we mixed. And we mixed again. That's what took us a long time. It took me 8 months of mixing. And that's where I drove myself insane. And then I had to stop at some point. It's just I ran out of money, I ran out of everything, because at that point it was like, it's okay. Because it wasn't so much the mixing for quality of sound, it was really thinking about what the arrangement was. What is it that we wanted? What is the story we want to tell?
Mm-hmm. So now, like all musicians, you finish a project, take a break, and then you think, what's next? What's the next mountain to climb?
We are creating a sort of a concert visual with this. We're actually, because we're going to be performing this live in a series of venues. So we're actually working with a couple of the schools, with the Tandon School as well as the Tisch School. So we've got dancers who are putting together, in fact, some of the dancers at the Tisch School have put together some of the most beautiful movements for a few of the songs.
We have some musicians here at Steinhardt too.
No, and we are hoping to actually put together a touring ensemble to perform this.
Wow.
So which next year, so we're working on that. And then meanwhile, I sat down with Kenny and, working on new music as well.
Wow.
It just depends. My view is there's no urgency. When you're meant to do it, it'll come to you. You can't force it. When you get out of the way, the music will come.
So when you take a break from it, do you miss it? Or are you constantly thinking?
I never take a break from it. I sing every morning with sandalwood and song. Is the way I start my day.
What's sandalwood?
I burn sandalwood incense and I sing. And I don't particularly sing for a purpose. I sing for myself. I sing because I want to touch the notes and touch myself through the notes.
Wow. Okay, now everybody in this room have gotten a better sense of you, at least a little piece of you. In closing, what can you offer these guys? What else can you inspire them with to move forward? Because they're mostly at a point where they're ready to blossom, they're ready to expand and find their place in the world.
Well, what I have to say is not something I'm not necessarily sure I would have listened to it myself a few years ago. But I just have a thought process for how inspiration occurs, and I just wanted to talk about that a little bit, if I can, which is inspiration, as I've seen it, comes from sort of three eyes, if you like. The big eye of inspiration. You need three eyes, and the small eyes. And the first small eye, as I've been thinking about it, is immersion. Whatever you can't get away from practice, because one of the reasons, like sitting down by myself and just running the notes, not because I want to just get crazy about practicing, but I just see how much better I get each day, even though I'm not intending to. But just the immersion and just my imagination is so much better because you've immersed yourself. So I would say, whatever you do, whatever your life brings you, and life brings you ups and downs, that's life, But just you have to keep, as long as you're a musician, you have to be in immersion of some kind. You have to carve out the time, it's not easy. The second I would say, is what I call inclusion, One of the big things which I'm sort of surprised by, much more so here in America, is how insular a lot of the music is. And coming from the world music, sort of as a musician, as I've come back as an incarnation as a musician, how people are resistant when you think of world music, world, or, oh, I'm a jazz musician, I'm a classical musician, I'm a rock. We are musicians. Yes, we happen to have specialties, and I think the more you listen to other disciplines, the more you listen to different ways people are doing it. You don't have to sing it. Changes your vision. I mean, one of my stunning discoveries was finding out the different, suddenly all these Gregorian chants I used to sing when I was younger are actually ragas. I could connect them to scales of Indian music. The Phrygian dominant can connect to all sorts of beautiful tones in different music. So the second I would say, is inclusion. Don't close your head, don't close your mind to stuff. And the third, which I've been sort of touching on in different ways, is introspection. You have to be in touch with yourself. If you are mentally not in your best place, if you're not in your peak self, the music will not come out. You've seen such a lot of great musicians who are so talented, who are so good with the first two eyes, but don't have the inner light. And you just will never find their music to be inspired. And you are all going to be great musicians, and you have the potential to be great musicians. You're in the best school working with the best masters. And so I would just say, you've got to work out whatever your challenges are, and you'll have challenges, that you've got to work out a way that all three come together, and come together very consistently. That would be my prayer. And I'd just say the one last thing. You know, the universe is out there really taking care of you. You know, we are not alone. We are not out there left to kind of hang dry. There is an incredibly beautiful plan in the universe. We just need to trust that and keep doing our work. You know, even though it doesn't seem that it's exactly happening the way we think it should happen, because somehow it all makes sense in the end. That's my 2 cents.
Now, as you were talking, I was thinking of the last interview I did with saxophonist Dave Liebman right here last week. And I asked him for his words of advice, and he said, double major. He said, right? He said, you know, find something that you can support yourself with, but separate that from your art, from your music, so that you don't have to do types of music that you don't really want to do. In a sense, this is exactly what you've done. So, congratulations. From a different angle.
Yep.
But it's like all the pieces of the puzzle. Everybody we interview, everybody we talk to has a different perspective. So it gives us all an idea of we're all different and we all have a different journey.
We sure do.
Chandrika, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.